Well, I won't be able to say I get it.
Peter, you.
Yeah.
We'll go ahead and call the hearing to order. I appreciate everybody being here today, and we're going to focus on the future of the motor carrier safety. And it's important to note at the outset that the safety record of commercial motor carriers and motor coach operations has improved dramatically since the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration was established in 1999. According to the FMCSA's most recent large truck and bus crash facts, the number of large trucks and buses involved in fatal crashes decreased by 17% and 4% respectively from 2003 to 2013. Industry, drivers, and the enforcement community alike deserve the credit for all of these achievements. Congress and this committee in particular has played an important role as well, from creating the FMCSA to focus specifically on truck and bus safety, to authorizing the Motor Carrier Safety Assistance Program, which provides resources for states to enforce federal commercial motor vehicle regulations. I'm concerned, however, about the growing scope and number of new regulations being placed on the industry. Just in the past few years, the agency has imposed new hours of service regulations, implemented the controversial CSA program, and at the direction of Congress, it's imposed new equipment mandates on both truck and bus operations and operators. I'm also concerned about the growth of the FMCSA. The budget for the agency has more than doubled since fiscal year 2001. Its first full year of operation stands at $572 million. While I support a strong safety program, we need to ensure that funds are being spent on initiatives that will move the needle in terms of reducing crashes, injuries, and fatalities on our nation's highways. Now, particularly concerned to me is a recent regulatory proposal to raise the minimum levels of financial responsibility, potentially by millions of dollars. As this committee continues to work on the long-term surface transportation reauthorization, we should examine what additional safety technologies and initiatives and common sense reforms to the regulatory process could be employed to further reduce crashes, injuries, and deaths attributable to commercial motor vehicles. If more regulation is needed, or should Congress concentrate to a greater extent on providing the right incentives for truck and bus operators to operate safely? We're grateful that each of the stakeholders represented today has developed thoughtful policy recommendations. We look forward to a robust debate over the specific proposals. From providing greater flexibility to state enforcement agencies, to encouraging the development and deployment of active safety systems, and reforming the way FMCSA undertakes rulemakings, deserve robust debate and some serious consideration. I'm hopeful that today's hearing is going to provide our subcommittee members with insight into the broad spectrum of proposals to continue improving motor carrier safety and inform this committee's work as we develop a long-term surface transportation reauthorization bill. Now, I look forward to hearing from our witnesses, and I now recognize Ms. Norton for her opening statement.
Thank you very much, Chairman Graves, for scheduling this hearing. It's an important hearing, and I congratulate you because it is the first hearing under your leadership, and I look forward to working closely with you. I recognize, Mr. Chairman, that both you and Chairman Schuster want a long-term highway bill. So before I say anything about the direct subject matter, the important vehicle safety issue, I must express the frustration I'm hearing not only in my district but from around the country about the delay, or what appears to be a delay, in getting through this committee a long-term surface transportation authorization bill. And Mr. Chairman, if not a long-term bill, for example, the four-year bill, and I've been here when there have been six-year bills, certainly a longer-term bill than the past, the very short bill that was passed before. We need the longest term bill possible. It's inconceivable to me that we would be 10 days to May 31st before the deadline expires. And I have seen no indication that during this period there has been movement on even trying to get a bill. That's what is most troubling to me, Mr. Chairman. And it is particularly frustrating now that we are full into the construction season. And there is no certainty of the future of a highway transit program with funding whatsoever that we've been able to transmit to state and local governments. So what do we see them doing? They're already slowing down, taking up projects that have been long delayed. I also do not see the search for a sustainable solution to shore up the Highway Trust Fund. We know what happened with the solution we've been using for 50 years. We ran out of funds, and funds had to be transmitted from the Treasury in order to just get through the authorized period. The Congressional Budget Office estimates that the shortfall, if we use that approach, is $174 billion over the next 10 years, and that's just to maintain funding levels without doing anything about what have become now increasingly urgent needs in our state and localities. The gap for a 6-year bill at current levels is $92 billion. Now, if you want to see that increase, the longer we hold up, the more expensive whatever bill we put out will be. So you would think that there would be every effort to contain the costs by getting a bill out on the streets now. The real test of how quickly Congress moves after we pass whatever extension we do is, of course, a funding plan for a long-term bill. I know that Chairman Schuster stands firm in wanting our committee and our subcommittee to move a robust long-term bill. It's up to the Republican leadership and the tax writing committees to come to the table and show that they are serious as well. Today's hearing, of course, is about the future of motor carrier safety. This is a subject that I'm very interested in, and particularly the innovative technologies and new ideas that I've begun to hear about to raise the bar on safety. I hope this hearing, however, is a refreshing change from what has become the norm on truck and bus issues. Endless requests for exemptions and calls to block DOT safety rules. There is no doubt room for some improvement on many rules that the federal agencies have issued. But rather than calls to eliminate regulation, as has become the norm, we should be challenging industry, DOT, and stakeholders to sit down, be creative, work toward a common goal, and utilize their resources in a way that will have the most positive effect on safety. I know we can do this. This is not an impossible task. I'm very interested to hear about steps in the right direction. For example, DOT recently convened a negotiated rulemaking committee to develop a rule on driver training. More robust driver training is something Congress has directed DOT to consider for nearly 25 years. The first directive was in a bill in 1991. To say this rule is overdue is putting it fairly mildly. I hope that this new committee can facilitate a rule that all parties can agree to, which will expedite DOT's publication of the rule and limit litigation once it is finalized. I would also like to recognize, finally, Mr. Chairman, the dedication of safety advocates and family members of truck accident victims who come to members of Congress and continue to work tirelessly to educate Congress and the public. Their stories help to heighten our awareness of the real-world impacts that policy decisions have on our constituents' lives. I welcome their presence here today as we discuss this issue. Mr. Chairman, I may have to leave because of the Rules Committee, but I will certainly return. Again, I thank you for this hearing.
Thank you, Ranking Member Norton. Very pleased to have Ranking Member DeFazio with us, and yield to him for an opening statement.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. First and foremost, congratulations on taking over the very important Surface Transportation Subcommittee. This, I think, is your first official hearing, and so congratulations on that. It's an appropriate subject. I'm also looking forward to working with you on a long-term, robustly funded surface transportation bill. I think everybody in the audience should clap at that point. I delve very deeply into highway and motor carrier safety during my 4 years as chairman of the subcommittee. 9 hearings. Many of the problems we investigated, development of the CSA, drug testing, medical qualifications of drivers, bus safety, truck size and weight, cross-border trucking, FMCSA's oversight of carriers, it's all, unfortunately, still very much a work in progress. Very little has been settled. Since FMCSA was created, Congress has continuously legislated in this area. In MAP 21 alone, we directed FMCSA to undertake 41 regulatory changes, most of which required rulemaking. We keep mandating lots of activity, and today it seems to have resulted in less clarity for the industry and a wide variety of stakeholders. I think we can do better. The title of this hearing is The Future of Motor Carrier Safety, and I hope some forward-thinking ideas come out of this hearing. I'm very open to solutions that allow flexibility while advancing safety and helping drivers do their jobs more efficiently. And I think in order to look holistically at safety, we've got to look at the realities and the pressures on the ground or on the highway in the industry and understand what drives decision-making and behavior by companies and drivers. And federal rules are just one part of that. Temporarily blocking FMCSA efforts or granting exemptions may provide some degree of relief or advantage to one segment of the industry or another, but it's a Band-Aid approach. It's not what we should be doing long term. Let's take an example, and I spent some time on this issue, hours of service. FMCSA's regulations are incredibly difficult to understand. For our economy to thrive, we can't hamstring companies with overly prescriptive rules. At the same time, hours of service are the basic wage and hour laws for the men and women whose office is the highway, and they aren't eligible for overtime under the Fair Labor Standards Act, and we need to address the really very important potential for fatigued drivers on the highways. But I don't think we can get there until we address some underlying issues such as detention time. Changes in hours of service rules will have limited impact if we haven't dealt with detention time, particularly as relates to independent and small business drivers. A truck driver gets to the loading dock, shipper facility. They can sit there, say, 3 hours, sometimes even more, waiting, but it counts against their daily and weekly, on-duty limits. And most truck drivers are paid by the load rather than a set wage, the independent small business. So these drivers often face the impossible choice between earning less money than they need to stay in business, despite working a 14-hour day, or violating hours of service rules or shading them a little bit. That's a problem that should be dealt with. We used to have rules to deal with that. There's no incentive on the other side of these loads anymore without detention time pay to be efficient for the drivers. It's better with the bigger companies because they can really carry some clout there. But for a lot of the small business and independent, it's a very real problem. I've introduced legislation on the Congress needs to look at other solutions. I look forward to hearing some innovative ideas. I thank the witnesses for their somewhat voluminous testimony. I did read it all on the airplane yesterday. Luckily, I had a 5-hour flight, and coffee. But there are some very interesting premises in there. I do find some differences of opinion on some critical issues, and hopefully that'll come out during the hearing today. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks, Ranking Member DeFazio. So I'd like to welcome all of our witnesses here, and I know some of you traveled a long ways, and we obviously appreciate that. I'm especially pleased to introduce Tom Kretzinger, who hails from the Kansas City area. Tom joined the family business in 1981 after graduating from law school and has served as the president of American Central Transport. truckload carrier. It's a truckload carrier operating over 300 trucks since 2005. Tom is an active member of the American Trucking Association, serving as its executive director and board of directors and chairing the ATA Litigation Center. He's a previous chairman of the truckload carriers and serves on TCA's board of directors. Tom, welcome to the committee. I'd also like to welcome our other panelists, Mr. Danny Schnautz, Operations Manager, Clark Freight Lines, and he's here on behalf of the Owner-Operator Independent Drivers Association. Captain Bill Reese with the Idaho State Police on behalf of the Commercial Vehicle Safety Alliance. Mr. Brian Scott, who's president of Escott Bus Lines Incorporated on behalf of the United Motor Coach Association. And Mr. Lamont Bird, who's the Director of Safety and Health International of the Brotherhood of Teamsters. I'd ask unanimous consent that our witnesses' full statements be included in the record, and without objection, that is so ordered. And since your written testimony is going to be made a part of the record, the committee would ask that you please limit your testimony to 5 minutes. And with that, Mr. Schnautz, we'll start with you.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Danny Schnautz, and I appreciate the opportunity to testify on behalf of the Owner-Operator Independent Drivers Association. My experience in the trucking industry covers over 30 years and has given me the opportunity to work as a long-haul trucker operating across the United States, as well as in motor carrier management. Additionally, I'm a Reserve Sheriff's Deputy Captain and a pilot. OOIDA represents the small business truckers that are the majority of the trucking industry. More than 90% of U.S. carriers own 20 or fewer trucks, and half of all carriers are one-truck operations. The average small business trucker has driven more than 20 years and 2 million accident-free miles. This hearing comes at a critical time for the future of motor carrier safety policy. Instead of a reasoned understanding and approach to improving highway safety by addressing the key factors behind at-fault truck crashes, FMCSA policy and enforcement is driven by a goal of absolute compliance with the letter of every single regulation, no matter the connection to at-fault crashes. This is a huge missed opportunity to achieve greater safety results at a lower regulatory burden. This focus on compliance with each of hundreds of regulations is the genesis for many of the FMCSA's most recent, most costly, and most flawed regulatory and enforcement policies, including changes to hours of service rules, technology mandates, and the Compliance, Safety, and Accountability Program called CSA. We were compliant and we were legal, but we weren't safe. A major carrier CEO said this recently, and he couldn't be more correct. Under its current methodology, CSA inaccurately paints safe small carriers as unsafe, reducing access to business and opening them up to misguided enforcement activities. Meanwhile, truly unsafe carriers that crash frequently get ignored. Two examples illustrate the flaws of FMCSA's current approach. Recently, one of my company's trucks was inspected by a Texas state trooper. Although the truck was in stellar condition, an inspection violation impacting our CSA score was issued because the trooper determined that the decals for 2 digits of the truck's U.S. DOT number were unreadable. Also, at a recent safety meeting, rather than discuss topics that would actually relate to safety outcomes, such as breaking down the preventative actions a driver could have taken to avoid a crash or highlighting proper following distance, because of CSA, we train drivers on the proper completion of a form. One of OIDA's greatest concern is that the FMCSA's approach will force many of the safest drivers and carriers out of the industry because it inhibits them from being successful small business owners. These are small business truckers with every incentive to operate safely. The current focus on technology initiatives actually hinders safety by placing more pressure on drivers when they are already caught between a regulatory rock and an economic hard place. Technology is not a substitute for skilled professional drivers, as it results in drivers more focused on not triggering an alert than on making smart, safe driving decisions. With technology in the name of safety further devaluing the skill of the driver, the long-standing approach by the entire supply chain to pay drivers for their productivity, not their value, pushes for more miles and decreases safety. In addition to today's hyper-focus on compliance and technology, the FMCSA is also advancing an action that directly targets small carriers and will result in no safety benefit. OOIDA is opposed to a likely 500% increase in motor carrier financial responsibility requirements, and we thank Chairman Graves for his help in combating this effort. This change will cause annual truck premiums to increase by $10,000 or more. despite FMCSA's own data showing that the costs of 99% of truck-involved crashes are covered currently. Instead of these approaches, OOIDA sees the upcoming highway reauthorization as an opportunity to set into motion needed changes to FMCSA policy and enforcement priorities. A top goal should be an effectiveness review of existing FMCSA regulations, many of which have been on the books for decades with no evaluation on their impact to safety. Second, Congress should require any new regulations to be focused on addressing a specific problem and based upon research reflecting the entire industry, not just the experience of large motor carriers. Critically, as the GAO and others have recommended, CSA scores should be removed from public view until the FMCSA corrects the accuracy of the program's data and methodology. We're grateful to Congressman Barletta for his safety-focused bill on this issue and the committee's work on a long-term reauthorization. Thank you for the opportunity to testify and for holding today's hearings.
Thank you very much. Now we'll move to Mr. Kretzinger.
Thank you very much. Chairman Graves, Ranking Member Norton, members of the subcommittee, I'm Tom Kretzinger, President and CEO of American Central Transport. Today I testify on behalf of American Trucking Associations, the largest trade association for the trucking industry, representing more than 35,000 member companies. I will speak today about the trucking industry's positive safety record and about a fundamental change in the government's approach to truck safety that is needed to continue this long-term trend. The truck-involved fatality rate has decreased 74% since 1975, and in the last decade alone has dropped 38%. Continuous improvement will require an acknowledgement of the principal causes of truck crashes and appropriate countermeasures. Vast majority of large truck crashes are the result of driver errors, not vehicle defects. FMCSA's crash causation study found driver error was a, quote, critical reason behind 87% of the crashes. Meaningful improvements will also require a broadened approach from the current rules and enforcement-centric model to one promoting voluntary adoption of safety technologies and initiatives. ATA believes the discussion of the most effective ways to improve truck safety falls into three categories: rules, enforcement, and a new partnership. ATA has a proud history of supporting new common sense safety rules. ATA was an early advocate of mandatory drug and alcohol testing, the CDL program, and the upcoming Drug and Alcohol Clearinghouse. ATA continues to call for regulatory initiatives to improve safety. Regarding these regulations, ATA supports a proposed rule to mandate electronic logging devices to track hours of service compliance, a pending rule to mandate stability control devices with some flexibility to account for the diversity of the industry. ATA is also eager to see a proposed rule calling for mandatory speed limiters on trucks, since vehicle speed is the greatest contributor to highway crashes. Finally, recognizing the role of driver behavior in crashes, FMCSA should make development of a national system to alert motor carriers to moving violations and license suspensions as one of the agency's top priorities. Turning to enforcement, continuation of the long-term improvement in truck safety will require a change in the government's enforcement approach. Despite clear evidence driver behavior is responsible for the majority of crashes, federal funding for on-road truck enforcement is predominantly spent on inspecting vehicle condition, not traffic enforcement. Government research shows traffic enforcement coupled with a limited inspection is at least 4 times more effective in preventing crashes and saving lives. Yet FMCSA data reflects a steep decline in enforcement activity. FMC's current safety efforts are largely limited to compliance and enforcement. The agency should use a carrot and stick, but is focused on using the stick. This approach is limited in its effectiveness and does not address ways to compel positive behavioral change. Government should partner with us to promote voluntary adoption of innovative safety tools and technologies. In short, government could establish criteria for meeting a gold standard and reward the fleets that meet it. Government incentives can accelerate adoption of new tools and technologies already being embraced by the industry. Among the more promising technologies are video event recorders. These devices, mounted on a windshield, can monitor what occurs inside and outside a vehicle. Records are saved when risky driving or collisions are detected, and a supervisor is subsequently alerted. My company is a good example. We are currently employing these technologies voluntarily, and it's really helping. We have seen a 64% reduction both in the number of events and the severity of events, all while increasing the number of units in our trucks. Mr. Chairman, we are eager to work with the government on more creative safety approaches. Thank you for the opportunity to testify.
Thank you very much. Captain Reese.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the subcommittee. Thank you for holding this important hearing and for inviting the Commercial Vehicle Safety Alliance to testify. My name is Bill Reese, and I'm a captain with the Idaho State Police. I currently serve as the president of CVSA. The Alliance represents the jurisdictions responsible for the enforcement of commercial motor vehicle safety laws in the U.S., Canada, and Mexico. As Congress considers the future of CMV safety, we believe there are a number of opportunities to make changes that will help advance our collective goal of reducing crashes and saving lives. Most critical is giving the states more flexibility to design and implement programs that improve CMV safety. Our top priority is saving lives, but we also have a responsibility to meet a long list of requirements under the Motor Carrier Safety Assistance Program and to enforce the associated safety regulations, doing all of this with limited resources. A state's commercial vehicle safety program is comprised of a number of aspects, including roadside inspections, traffic enforcement on commercial motor vehicles, compliance reviews, safety audits, targeted strike forces, educational activities, and even traffic enforcement on private citizens operating dangerously around commercial motor vehicles. The appropriate level for each activity varies from state to state and changes over time. States need the ability to design a comprehensive CMV safety program that uses creative solutions to address issues unique to that state. That's not to say that the state should not be held accountable. Congress and FMCSA should focus on setting broad parameters, program elements, goals, and expected outcomes, and then hold the states accountable for meeting program goals using our annual commercial vehicle safety plan. We also support consolidating and streamlining the grants, which will reduce administrative burden on the states and provide more stability. This will enable states to spend more time and resources on doing the work of their program rather than administering it. We also believe more work needs to be done to update and clean up the federal regulations, which will benefit both enforcement and industry. Clarity, consistency, uniformity, and enforceability are the cornerstones of an effective regulatory framework. However, over time, additional regulatory authority coupled with changes to the industry and technology can result in inconsistent, outdated, and redundant regulatory language. To address this, CVSA supports requiring that FMCSA conduct a full review of the federal regulations every 5 years in collaboration with CVSA and industry. This will help with streamlining the regulations, eliminating outdated or redundant regulations, and clarifying those that need adjustment. Work is also needed to bring the safety regulations in line with regulatory guidance, interpretations, and policy memos issued by the agency. While this puts an additional administrative burden on FMCSA, maintaining the regulations is one of the agency's core responsibilities, and the benefits and savings that will accrue for enforcement, industry, and the public justify this endeavor. Congress should also consider eliminating or minimizing a number of legislative exemptions in the future. Legislative exemptions complicate enforcement and have no safety oversight. Finally, maximizing technology and improving data quality can help capitalize on existing enforcement activities as well as industry investments. It is imperative that those in the safety and enforcement communities take full advantage of technology to improve safety. New technologies like license plate readers and virtual inspection locations can expand enforcement's footprint, allowing a jurisdiction to cover more miles and more drivers and vehicles than they can with inspectors at fixed facilities alone. And we fully support policies that encourage industry to deploy technologies that can assist in preventing and mitigating crashes, such as vehicle stability and collision warning systems. It should be noted, though, that any new requirements on states or industry must be developed with the enforcement community in mind. Deployment of systems and devices will only be effective if they are functioning and used properly. One last note, we provided a number of recommendations on how to improve the future of CMV safety, which we hope will be helpful as this committee works on the next transportation bill. However, even with streamlined grants, clear regulations, top quality data, and full use of all available technology, the state programs cannot be effective without adequate funding. Funding for state CMV programs must keep pace with the growing motor carrier industry. That concludes my testimony. Thank you for the opportunity to testify.
Thanks, Captain. Mr. Scott.
Thank you. Chairman Graves, Ranking Member Norton, members of the subcommittee, on behalf of members of the United Motor Coach Association, thank you for calling this hearing today and for the opportunity to represent the bus and motor coach industry in my testimony. This committee has a long and distinguished record of promoting commercial motor vehicle safety in a reasonable and defensible regulatory climate. I am the president of Escott Bus Lines, a second-generation family-owned and operated bus and motor coach company with offices and facilities located throughout Central Florida. Like most bus companies, we started small when my parents, Louis and Diane Scott, purchased 2 minibuses in 1983. Currently, we operate a fleet of 84 motor coaches. Mr. Chairman, I want to frame this conversation from one critical perspective. Bus and motor coach travel is extremely safe. Percentage-wise, large buses account for less than 0.1% of the annual highway fatality toll. This remarkable safety record is no small achievement and is largely attributable to the vigilance and dedication of the men and women that drive, maintain, own, and manufacture our equipment. In a nutshell, our business is moving people safely, timely, and economically. The Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration also plays a critical role in facilitating interstate commerce and ensuring the safety of commercial motor vehicles. However, UMA is increasingly concerned that the culture of the agency through its actions have not served the cause of public safety and have been harmful to existing bus and motor coach carriers and the continued growth and health of the industry. We are concerned enough to worry about the continued viability of this important transportation sector. For the first time I can recall in my 30-plus year career, the nation's motor coach industry is in decline. A recent census report by John Dunham and Associates for the American Bus Association Foundation concluded that in 2013, the number of motor coach companies decreased by nearly 5%, a loss of 153 carriers in that year alone. Total passenger trips by motor coach in the U.S. declined by a whopping 32 million. UMA believes the regulatory climate at FMCSA is a significant contributing factor. The biggest issue to UMA is the current regulatory climate at FMCSA. Let me share a real-life example of the negative impacts of the current hostile enforcement posture of FMCSA. Jeff and Judy Rogers, who together founded Southeastern Tours in North Carolina over 2 decades ago. The company passed compliance reviews with satisfactory ratings in 2003, 2005, and in 2010. The last review began very differently when the FMCSA representative stated, "I'm going to warn you now that we have done 5 audits like this and we put 4 out of business." Paperwork snafus in combination with other correctable deficiencies led the company being placed out of service. A long, miserable trail of employee layoffs, equipment repossessions, foreclosures, and unpaid creditors are the hallmark of FMCSA's unwarranted out-of-service orders. Today, Jeff and Judy remain on the sidelines with an uncertain future. Jeff and Judy Rogers deserve the same opportunity as my parents, Louis and Diane Scott. There are many other examples in my written testimony. The single largest threat to passenger carriers today is FMCSA's decision to propose a potentially massive increase in minimum financial responsibility limits for passenger carriers. MAP 21 directed FMCSA to study the adequacy of current limits and submit their findings in a report to Congress, which, like every state legislative body in the nation, has historically established requirements. The report failed to include any analysis for passenger carriers but focused exclusively on trucks, yet suggests limits as high as a 400% increase. The suggestion that limits should be increased without any study whatsoever is unconscionable. UMA supports a bill introduced just last night by Congressman Scott Perry that clarifies that passenger limits should be established by Congress and directs FMCSA to do a comprehensive study of current limits and accident claims history of passenger carriers, consult with both the bus and insurance industries on the study, and submit that study to Congress. FMCSA's CSA program is another concern. If a driver of a car crashes into a legally stopped bus and is killed, nobody believes the bus and driver or company should be held accountable. Yet FMCSA insists on displaying these crashes to the public as a recorded fatal crash absent any specific context. The display of non-preventable crashes to the public is malicious, irresponsible, discouraging for motor carriers, and misleading to the public. These flaws are not just UMA's views, but GAO agrees. The GAO report of February 2014 concluded that FMCSA identified many carriers as high risk that were not later involved in a crash, potentially causing FMCSA to miss opportunities to intervene with carriers that were involved in crashes. My company received a violation citing us with failing to display the LLC at the end of our name. In another instance, finding no violations in a recent inspection of a driver and vehicle, an enforcement official decided the restroom was smelly and the carrier was cited. All too often, we hear enforcement officials say, well, we have to find something. In any analysis, safety is not improved, the taxpayer is cheated, and CSA continues irresponsibly. Finally, UMA is concerned about the delays in approving new entrant applicants for operating authority. That concludes my testimony. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Scott. Mr. Byrd?
Chairman Graves, Ranking Member Norton, members of the subcommittee. My name is Lamont Byrd. I'm the Director of Safety and Health at the International Brotherhood of Teamsters. As a union representing more than 600,000 commercial drivers, we welcome the invitation to testify today. Our members contend daily with crumbling roads, long work hours, bigger trucks, increased congestion, and poorly trained drivers, all of which undermine safety. In order to ensure highway safety, these issues must be addressed. The current hours of service rule is designed to give drivers an opportunity for sufficient rest. It represents 2 decades of rulemaking, court challenges, and numerous studies. 2 critical components of the rule were suspended in last year's Cromnibus. The change to the 34-hour restart provision increased the number of hours that a driver may work from 70 hours to over 80 hours per week, and the required consecutive off-duty periods from 1 a.m. to 5 a.m., also suspended, was designed to mitigate cumulative fatigue. With the DOT driver restart study underway, Congress should not consider making either of these provisions permanent. The Teamsters strongly oppose increases to truck size and weight. The industry claims that increasing truck size and weight limits will result in fewer trucks on the road, but with every increase, truck traffic has grown as shippers have taken advantage of cheaper rates and divert freight from rail to trucks. Highway design, stopping distances, congestion, and the current condition of our infrastructure are all factors that need to be considered as we debate this issue. The Teamsters Union also opposes increasing 28-foot double trailers to 33 feet. Adding 10 feet to an already elongated tractor-trailer combination decreases maneuverability and visibility and compromises safety. Congress should not entertain special interest truck size and weight exemptions until it can examine the results of the ongoing comprehensive truck size and weight study. Testing drivers for substance abuse is necessary to keep unfit drivers off the road. But hair testing presents some interesting challenges. Our primary concern is there are no national standards as with urine testing. Thresholds for positive test results are low to a point where secondhand smoke and environmental exposures to marijuana, for example, could affect test results. Since there are real consequences for those who test positive, it's important to ensure that these tests produce accurate and fair results. Equipping trucks with the latest safety technologies will eventually help reduce truck crashes. Technologies such as vehicle stability, lane departure warning, and collision warning systems can help drivers to avoid accidents. The Teamsters also support electronic logging devices to track hours of service. However, it's important to provide drivers with proper training to ensure a high level of driver acceptance and that the data used collected by these technologies not be used to harass the drivers. For too long, the minimum insurance for motor carriers has remained at $750,000. The 30-year standard has become woefully insufficient as accidents can easily cost millions of dollars. The Teamsters support raising liability coverage to $4.5 million and indexing it to inflation of medical costs. In that same vein, Teamsters Union has serious concerns about attempts to create a national hiring standard for motor carriers. While we appreciate the challenges that shippers and brokers experience in determining what constitutes a safe motor carrier, proposed legislation is overly broad in that it imposes no liability for negligent selection of a motor carrier. Fixing DOT's safety rating system is a better solution. Safe operating procedures for motor carriers require accountability. FMCSA's CSA program provides that accountability, and we support it. While not perfect, we believe that it is a major improvement over the previous program. Our members report that as a result of CSA, they are able to perform more comprehensive pre-trip and post-trip inspections because carriers are more sensitive to how vehicle maintenance, for example, affects the carrier's CSA score. As I conclude, I want to mention detention time. Teamster drivers are compensated for waiting time, but that's not always the case with non-union drivers. The longer they wait, the more time they lose, which can affect the time that they have left to drive. These drivers can then feel pressured to violate safety regulations by driving while fatigued. The IBT is committed to keeping our drivers and all others with whom they share the road safe. We look forward to working with you to help grow a transportation network that meets the future needs of this country, moves freight efficiently, and improves safety on our nation's highways. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Byrd. We'll now move into questions. We'll start with Mr. Hanna.
Thank you, Chairman. Mr. Kretzlinger and Mr. Snotts, I have a report that came out today from the American Transportation Research Institute that has studied the hours of service, the 34-hour restart rule that was initiated without the completion of this study last July. And the results are very predictable based on the nature of the study and the quality of the study. I'll give you a quick idea of what it is. I just would like your response. The crash data analyzed shows a statistically significant increase in truck crashes after July 1st, 2013. Specifically, with injury and towaway crashes, in particular, the increase in injury and towaway crashes would be expected based on shifting of trucks to more congested weekday travel due to increased traffic and exposure. The truck GPS data analyzed identified a shift because of this rule from truck to daytime hours, and from nighttime hours to daytime hours, and from weekends to more congested weekdays. All of it could have been anticipated, in my view, and has been widely talked about. So that it's what we're suggesting here, and I'd like to submit this for the record, is that this rule actually made the world less safe for people in your industry, and it is, in my view, specifically because they never even bothered to study the change in dynamics of when they were asking people to drive. And I'm not asking you to confirm or not, but I'd just like both of your opinions.
Thank you, Congressman, for the question. I saw this study this morning, and I think it proves the law of unintended consequences quite well. And it confirms what I hear from talking to my drivers. Average age of our drivers is 50 years old. These men and women have been around a while. And they tell me when you used to get out of the city, you know, you'd hit that open road and it'd be kind of relaxing. They tell me that we're in traffic pretty much all the time now. And of course, traffic around them is often on the cell phone. So I think it is true that pushing, micromanaging the hours the way they have done has pushed more trucks onto the road during weekdays and daylight hours. And that's when the cars are there. And it's not surprising you'll have more trouble.
Yes, for sure the hours of service restrictions are flawed in that they try to predict what a driver is going to be feeling and thinking in the days and weeks and hours ahead, which is impossible to do. I've lived under hours of service. I made a living under hours of service regs. So I can tell you that the more flexibility that we have, the better they are. And whenever they put in more restrictions, they do cause more problems, unintended consequences for sure. But there are so many times when a driver just needs a different hour that day. And every time we reduce that hour availability to him, even if it's not part of a pattern, then we further erode highway safety.
The interesting thing is that they have elected to continue the study and are using the same university to do the study. And it's pretty clear that everybody involved in this is digging in for lack of a better term, to prove that what we know through this study and all kinds of anecdotal evidence is not true. So that they are engaging in a study they would like us to believe that they will come out with later in the year that is unbelievable on its face, because they are hiring the same people to do it again, who are well paid and clearly have decided that no matter what the world tells them, they're incapable of making a mistake. Thank you for your indulgence. I'm over my time, I think.
Ranking Member Hahn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate you holding this hearing today. This has long been an issue for me on a number of levels, because I represent the Port of Los Angeles, and along with Long Beach, it's the largest port complex in this country. And one of the moves that I worked on very hard was the idea of moving cargo off-peak. And we do have a system at Long Beach and Los Angeles where we are, I think at this point, close to 50% of the cargo we're moving in the weekends and in the evenings. We were on a 21st century freight panel in this committee, and one of the recommendations that came from the panel was that ports across the country implement moving cargo in the evenings and the weekends, mainly because it allows our truck drivers to not have to compete with the commuters during rush hour on Monday through Friday. So I think it makes sense. I'd like to see that really as a policy nationwide. I think it makes a lot of sense. You know, one of the issues that has come to my attention in my port area is the classification of independent contractor for some of the port truck drivers. And I was with them this Monday. They were striking because they felt like there was wage theft and unfair employment practices by categorizing them as independent contractors as opposed to employees of the company. And many of these drivers are stuck at the bottom of the economic ladder, while other industry workers around our ports, railroads, longshoremen, are making a good living. These drivers, told me that they're overworked and underpaid, which I think leads to unsafe roads because of the welfare of the driver. So, Mr. Byrd, for you, some of these port truck drivers have seen victories in courts, and yet still I think this unfair practice exists, again, particularly from my experience around the ports. Is there a federal role in fixing this injustice, and what would that be?
Thank you for the question. I think it's a very tough and very challenging issue that you raise. With respect to Teamster drivers, our driver members are typically paid for all of their off-duty time. And then there's this whole idea of paid for detention time, right, which I think is probably a little easier to enforce should there be a contract between the shipper and a motor carrier than it would be for an independent driver. So we think it's important to properly classify the drivers on the one hand. We think that the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration is doing rulemaking on coercion that we think might lend itself to helping to resolve this, because it brings, as I understand this proposed rule, it brings shippers into the enforcement jurisdiction of the agency. And this might be a way to bring them in and give independent drivers some leverage in dealing with the issue.
You know, in terms of the detention time or wait time, again, many of these drivers are only paid sometimes by the load when they pick it up or drop it off, and yet there is so much wait time. I particularly felt badly for them recently at what was going on at the ports. because of the shippers who gave up the chassis, the ownerships of the chassis to a third party, which meant the chassis were not where they needed to be for these drivers to pick up the chassis and their load, which gave them more wait time and detention time. Could you, I just have a few seconds left, but could you elaborate on your comment earlier that sometimes these drivers are then pressured to drive more hours?
Yeah, when you have a situation, and we've talked with the port drivers also, when you have a situation where you've had these extended wait periods and you are paid by the load and the shipper expects the product to be moved, they are oftentimes pressured to carry that load without regard to where they stand with respect to compliance with hours of service. That's a real problem. Again, we think that the coercion rulemaking might help us on that.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Well, I think driving a truck is a good career. It ought to be a good career and ought to be something where someone could earn a good living by driving a truck, moving this country's goods. So thank you. I yield back.
We've had a procedural vote called, so there's just one vote, and what we will do is break, go take that vote, and please come back as promptly as you can so the witnesses don't have to wait too long. But we shouldn't be just a matter of time to run over there and run back, so we will. We'll have Mr. Hanna make a quick motion real quick.
Okay. Can we vote from here? Haven't we figured that out yet?
Recognize him for a motion.
So moved.
Mr. Hanna, I recognize you for a motion.
Motion to adjourn.
Recess.
A recess until after the vote. So we'll see you back.
So it's been moved to recess, which see no objection. So moved, and we will stand in recess until we get back. It shouldn't be too long. Thanks, everybody, for your patience, and we will bring this hearing back to order, and we will move to Mr. Barletta for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Captain Reese, as you know, I've been very concerned with FMCSA's Compliance Safety Accountability Program. I've heard from companies in my district that the scores are flawed and do not provide good information about the safety record of the commercial motor vehicle companies. Many of your fellow panelists' testimony mentioned violations that impact the CSA score but have little to do with crash risk, such as Mr. Schnauz's comments on the violations for a blanket not being present in a sleeper cab. What are your concerns with the CSA program, and are the safety scores fit for the general public?
Thank you, Congressman. CVSA supports the legislation you have to remove the scores from public display for a number of reasons. This is, and we sent a letter stating that to FMCSA. CSA is separate from the MIGSAP program and should not force changes. It's beginning to impact our state programs. Motor carriers are now requesting inspections frequently in an effort to try to get clean inspections and get their scores down. The data queue process is being affected. It's an unfunded mandate, and it's a growing burden, and it's just increased since we have the citation adjudication to deal with now. There's data quality issues, and this could be fixed by implementing hard coding and smart logic software. It's something that we've been encouraging FMCSA to do. Some of the traffic enforcement violations that are committed and citations issued but no inspections done, that information's not in there. We'd like to see the program fully implemented, which would include the safety fitness determination and intervention process. They both remain incomplete. And the bottom line is it was not being used as intended. We have shippers using this to determine whether a carrier is safe, and it was never intended for that. And these are just some examples of why we would like to see the scores come down from public view.
Thank you. Just yesterday, I finally received the response from DOT Secretary Fox to my question about the ongoing truck size and weight study. And in short, it states that the study will not include an evaluation of the impacts of heavier trucks on our local roads and bridges. This is unacceptable. Heavy trucks today travel about 50 billion miles on local roads, the roads that are not being studied, and that amounts to about a third of all their travel. These are the same local roads excluded from the study that carry about 2/3 of the miles traveled by the public in their cars. Now, compared to our interstates and major highways, these roads are simply built differently. My family was in the road construction business. We built roads and bridges. I know how many inches of concrete are on an interstate, and I know how many inches of asphalt are on a public or local or township road. It's not the same. Mr. Byrd and Mr. Schnauz, both of you represent the drivers and the people driving on our local roads. In your professional experience, what have been the conditions you've experienced driving the first and last mile of your routes on local roads?
First of all, we see a lot of variance in highway markings, in lane size, in ramp radiuses, things like that, which makes it very challenging. Second of all, we do see a lot of substandard roads. We see that on the interstates too, but just typically in the small towns or any town, whenever you're off of the interstate, we're ready to see lanes that you need to try to avoid because it has the big holes in them, and that's hard on your truck. We're often seeing roads that we can't go down or have weight limits on them that challenge us to get where we're trying to go without taking a route that we weren't prepared to take.
And I think that our memberships who have operated on the secondary roads have experienced similar experiences. I think it's pretty clear to us that oftentimes these secondary roads are not, quite as safe as a larger interstate.
So you agree the secondary roads are more dangerous, as found by the Road Information Program report published last year? Or is there anything in your experience that says that these statistics are wrong?
There's nothing in my experience or in my discussions with our driver membership that would suggest otherwise.
Secondary roads are more dangerous. We have a lot of different traffic speeds going on, You have a lot of turns, so for sure, they're more dangerous.
And you know who pays for the secondary roads? The local townships, the local municipalities, the cities who are having the most trouble providing services to their people. I was a mayor, too, and I understand that just as well. I'm going to press Secretary Fox to find a way to get answers to these questions about the impact on local roads, because that's what I asked for in the study, and that's not what I'm getting. I don't care how long it takes. Congress can't make a decision of this magnitude without knowing how this will impact the safety of our constituents and the ability of the states and the localities to pay for their critical transportation infrastructure. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Poliatano.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the witnesses. I want to tell Mr. Byrd on the port truck drivers, we're with you. We think that this has been an area where the state of California has been long trying to get some clarity and some assistance to this independent truck driver, so thank you for your help. I'm also very concerned, Mr. Byrd, about the increase in truck size. And Mr. Chairman, I have an email from Highway Patrol, California Highway Patrol, opposing increased truck weights because it creates much more violent and damaging crashes, and it goes on to give other information. And also the Peace Officers Research Association sent a letter in actually in February 2013 in regard to the same thing, saying that they oppose efforts to increase truck size and weight. For the record? Mr. Chairman? The two letters for the record? Thank you, sir. The issue was raised when I was in the State Assembly in California back in the 90s. And the truck weights and sizes affect the stopping distances, the braking, the vehicle stability control. Many of the highways and on-ramps and off-ramps in California just cannot handle the large trucks. And I know a couple of years ago there was an effort to increase the tandem 53-footers, and we also opposed that simply because our on-ramps, off-ramps, and highways are not able to handle the tandem 53-footers. The fact that it does save lives, and there's a couple of people in the audience who have had family members killed in accidents, and I think we need to, Mr. Chairman, allow them to have an entry into the record about the reason why they feel it is that necessity to be able to allow the general public to have a weigh-in on this, because it's their safety we're talking about. So the other thing, Mr. Byrd, is DOT recently decided to allow Mexican truck companies to apply for authority to operate long-haul trucking services in the United States. We went over that issue a couple of years back here in this committee. It based its decision on the results of a pilot required by the Congress to determine the safety of long-haul trucking operations beyond the border and commercial zones in the U.S. But the Inspector General issued a report saying DOT reached its conclusion based on unreliable data that the small sample of participating motor carriers was not sufficiently representative to allow DOT to apply the study's results to all Mexican truck companies. Well, unfortunately, NAFTA requires it, if I remember correctly. This is one of the parts of the agreement. But we need to be sure that if we're going to allow these trucking companies, that they meet all the safety requirements that we have on our trucking companies, on all of our operations. And if you believe that limited inspections conducted on these trucks during the pilot program provided enough information to support their decision to allow them on our U.S. roads. And Mr. Schnauz, would you comment on that?
Yes, I would be happy to. No, we do not think that the inspections and the data that are being used to open that border up are at all adequate. We saw a lot of nonconformances and inspections during the program. We pointed those out. And it wasn't even really meeting the definition of a pilot program because of the way it was structured. But those out-of-service violations were not being properly flagged and then recorded and then reported. And with that overlooked data and then a far less amount of data than what they initially said they were going to find and use, there's no way that this is at all representative of the Mexican trucking industry as a whole.
Well, we had great concerns over the ability to keep track of their driving hours, one, of the ability to have trucks operate with the same conditions we asked of our own trucks. with a language issue, with a hazardous material carried on there. And there were many of those issues that have been discussed ad nauseum, may I add. And I think we need to be able to ensure that if we do that, we do provide them with some, how would I say, something to follow so that we can tell them that they will be able to operate, but they have to have their trucks. I did speak to the Mexican consulate or somebody on the other side, and they indicated to me that all their trucks met the specs and that they were new trucks. Well, I beg to differ, and I told them so. So we need to be sure that you let us know, because this is an issue of safety on our side, and that's something we all need to be concerned about. And thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Berry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First question will be to Mr. Scott. It seems to me that every single one of us in the room and everybody outside the room is interested in driving on safe roads, and certainly as a business owner myself, there's almost no upside to minimizing your focus on safety. I mean, with the cost to your hurt employees or broken equipment or the liability that would come from cutting corners in that regard. But with that having been said, can you describe what effect a $20 million insurance minimum would do to a company like yours?
Well, thank you very much for the question. Basically, going from the current $5 million to $20 million, essentially, quadrupling the current standard would be financially devastating. And for companies smaller than myself, it would literally put them out of business. And it very well could put us out of business as well. It would most certainly discourage anybody, any new entrants from coming into this industry, because they simply would not be able to afford it. And there's been no study, no data shown that even proves that it's even necessary to do that.
I mean, from my perspective, it's almost like the action might be designed specifically to put companies out of business to a certain extent.
Well, I would agree with you. I mean, to me, it seems like a solution in search of a problem.
Has your company experienced any crashes that have exceeded the current $5 million limit?
We've been in business for 33 years, and no, we have never experienced a loss that has even come remotely close to that.
So based on that, and you've got 30-some years in it, you're the expert, I'm not, so I'm just going to ask you, what would you see would be the rationale to raise for the federal government? I'm not even thinking that this is the purview of the federal government, but if it is, so if that's the case, what would you suppose would be the rationale to raise it to that?
I can only speculate on what the thoughts are behind the scenes to do that, but it would create a significant hardship on the industry. It would reduce the size and the scope of our industry by an amount I'm not even sure that I can measure, but as you saw in my comments, the industry is already in decline, and this could very well be the nail in its coffin.
So, I mean, just like any other business owners, you're choosing, you've got a certain amount of revenue, you've got to pay employees, you've got to upgrade equipment, you've got to maintain equipment, you've got to pay your operating costs associated with all that stuff. The more that you pay in insurance premiums for which you don't use, right? You already stated that in 30-some years you haven't used anything close to that limit. That detracts and takes away from everything else, including maintenance and safety and so on. Does it just for anybody that's never operated a business? I think it's important for you to clarify that, because they might not understand that. A lot of folks think that that's just part and parcel to doing business. So something has to give. Your top line has to change, or your bottom line has to change. One of them has to change.
Well, you're absolutely correct. At the end of the day, any increase, any mandate that adds cost to a business has to be passed on to consumers. So our industry, passengers choose to travel by bus because it's convenient and it's economical and it's safe. You throw that $20 million layer on there, and the economical is going to go out the window. And you're absolutely correct. that businesses are going to be forced to make choices. Do I pay my insurance premium this month? Do I pay my bus payment this month? I can't give my drivers a raise, okay? All of those things play a factor.
Thank you. Moving on, Mr. Schnotz, if I've pronounced that correctly, just because you're operating out on the road as well, and I'm sure you see this much more than folks like me do, would you say the enforcement emphasis should be in focusing on some of the most egregious things? And I would just imagine somehow you can get in trouble from a safety violation for having an oil leak. And as a person who's driven old cars and worked on old cars and aircraft, sometimes you would use the terminology, if it's not leaking, it means it's empty. So what can you tell me about? Shouldn't our focus be on the most egregious of things?
Absolutely. We get citations for a trailer ID light being out on a daytime 20-minute drive, and that light won't be used in that 20-minute drive. We get all kinds of violations that really don't at all reward us for having inflated tires that have plenty of tread. And whenever we see these things, it's turned us into a standard of perfection is all that is available to us. And that's not real world. That just does not do anything but cause us to focus on these details. And as was said a minute ago, that money comes from somewhere. The time to focus on that comes from somewhere. It could be training. It could be other more important maintenance issues.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield.
Mr. Gibbs.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I had to go to testify in Rules Committee, so I've missed your testimony, but I've read it, and I also hope I don't ask a redundant question. But I want to start with either Mr. Shantz or Mr. Kratzinger about CSA scores, the Compliance, Safety, Accountability. When I talk to my truckers in my district, the stories they tell me are just unbelievable and scary. I had one tell me that I guess the bridge that's fallen down there, this Pence Bridge in Cincinnati on I-75, a hunk of concrete fell off and hit the truck, and the truck got dinged on his CSA score. So you want to elaborate on what's really going on out there? Because I've heard that I heard the administrator told one trucking person, driver or entity, you were there. So I mean, it's definitely broken, because what happens when these scores, when it's not held, it's not their fault. It dings them on the insurance rates, my understanding, and also can ding them on when potential customers, shippers are looking at safety records and stuff. So would you just kind of tell us what's going on in that regard?
Sure. Thank you for that question. And I can give you some personal experience. We pride ourselves on being by the book. We preach that always. By the book, no exceptions. I tell people, if you don't like the rules, call your congressman, but we're going to follow them regardless. Our scores were all very good and getting better, except for crash.
Except for what?
Crash.
Oh, crash, okay.
So we were having crashes. We've had some bad winters. Some of those were preventable by our driver, and some were not. Some were a car rear-ending our trailer. But we saw an audit coming. We know that. It's very good for focusing resources, federal resources, on audits. But at any rate, they came in, they audited us, spent 3 or 4 days, and at the end of all that, except for 2 or 3 minor violations, we were compliant. And so what's the end of this story? You're compliant. I don't see where that changed much. Plaintiffs' attorneys have becoming very creative at chasing money, and one of the things they've done is sue brokers and shippers under a negligent entrustment theory or negligent supervision. So they've made these folks very nervous for CSA scores. Something they don't have a lot of control on. So, I mean, it's us.
Excuse me, I've also heard that a trucking company can be, depending on the size of the business and number of trucks, they can be in different categories. And I had one trucker company tell me they got moved, they were at the top of their one category, and then they got shifted in the other category. And nothing changed other than get shifted in the category, and their CSA went really bad. Is that?
Yeah, we don't understand that. I mean, 1 month our crash score was good. Next month it was high. We got audited. Still on the record, it's now good again. I don't know why. I also would point out that these other CSA alerts are supposed to predict a crash. Our other scores are great. So they're out of joint.
Yeah.
So I don't think it's accurate.
Speaking of predicting a crash, the driver fitness basic is actually counter to predicting a crash, and that's been shown by the FMCSA data. Our company, like many others, is misrepresented by our CSA score. Our crash rate is better than industry average, and our out-of-service rate is better than industry average. So those two key metrics were safer than industry average. However, if you look at our CSA score, we don't look better than industry average. And it's because of the lights I mentioned earlier. If it's easy money for an agency, for a jurisdiction, to pull a truck over that has one light obviously out, write the ticket, let him go. So that's a big disconnect. The revenue drives this a lot. I know we all here follow the money.
I'm almost out of time. I want to ask one more quick question. In my subcommittee, dealing with Waters of the United States rule, we heard lots of testimony where the EPA did not engage the stakeholders of the states and all that. Do you feel that FMCSA engages with the industry effectively and also determine the impact of their regulations, especially small carriers?
Absolutely not. No.
Anybody else want to respond? Mr. Scott?
Thank you. I would say absolutely not. It's a hostile environment, and there was a time when FMCSA would work with the industry, and those days are long gone.
Thank you. My time has expired. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to all our witnesses. First question that I have is for Mr. Kretzinger. You raised the idea of a gold standard program to have fleets voluntarily adopt innovative safety tools that would enhance safety. I believe, too, safety is paramount, and this idea of a gold standard program is actually pretty intriguing. Can you offer some thoughts on what this program would look like and how it could improve safety in the near and the long term?
Certainly, and thank you, Congressman, for that. There's a lot of cool technology coming out. You know, you've heard of some of it. What is it going to be in 2 years? I don't know. It's a rapidly evolving thing. But these are tools that cost money, that are voluntary, and can have a big impact if you combine that with, driver counseling and coaching and other things. So a lot of members of ATA have gone out and spent the money on these things, even though they're not required by any government to do it, because they see that it's a good business and the right thing to do to be safe. That's what we all want. So I think if the government was able to do something like help them on other areas if they do this, that provides incentives for more and more to do it. And I think the cumulative effect would be a lot more safety.
Well, thank you very much for your response to that. Moving on to a different subject, I think it's very important to make sure we're focusing on the most effective ways to actually reduce and prevent traffic incidents. In your testimony, you point out that FMCA's report shows that more than 4 times as many crashes are prevented because of traffic enforcement in comparison to standard roadside inspections. And yet traffic enforcement only makes up about 10% of field enforcement interventions. With that percentage dropping, of course, as we know in recent years, I agree, too, that this is concerning. And I know that the ATA is not advocating for a specific solution on this disparity. But I'd ask you broadly, how can we achieve a better balance here?
I think what the focus ought to be is on the cause, and the cause is driver behavior. Not only the behavior of the truck drivers, but even more so the behavior of the passenger drivers. But so much of our problem is caused by something they do or they don't do. If you can impact that, you're going to have a greater impact on all of our goals, safety, than if you are spending your money on things that don't. Like many of the things that happen in the scale house don't cause wrecks. So if we can funnel our resources, our money, our people towards the things that do cause wrecks, and on these event recorders, we are seeing it. I mean, it's kind of a picture paints 1,000 words. It's following too close. It's distracted driving. It's not looking far ahead. It's people in the public not understanding how to drive safely around a big 18-wheeler going down the road at a high speed. If we can get to that, you will make a big impact. Whether a mud flap or a crack in the windshield or one light out, those things are important, but they're not going to have near the impact as behavior.
Well, thank you. Thank you for your responses. Mr. Byrd, thank you also for being here today and testifying. I'm a strong supporter of workforce training efforts. I believe they're a key part of creating and also maintaining jobs. As a matter of fact, I'm once again introducing a bill that would make it more flexible for people to access unemployment benefits and not be punished if an antiquated WIA system hasn't approved specific training, so that we can get people into jobs and employ more people. You mentioned in your testimony the efforts at PHMSA to expand entry-level driver training. How have your interactions with FMSCA been on this regulation?
Thank you for the question, Congressman. We have participated in the entry-level driver training advisory committee along with other stakeholders since late February. I think that overall the experience has been very positive. I think that the stakeholders, unions, motor carriers, et cetera, have had a really great opportunity to have input. We think that the agency is listening to us, and hopefully, at the end of the process, we will be able to come up with a reasonable proposed rule that will be acceptable to the motor carrier industry and the drivers.
Well, thank you. My time has expired.
Mr. Hardy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Scott, I'd like to probably address you first on this one. It's kind of been addressed already, but being a previous business owner myself, that's one of the reasons I came to Washington, is that I don't believe my children have the same opportunities today to start a business, expand a business, and grow a business to employ, which I've had the opportunity. You talked about in your testimony that you don't believe that somebody could start that business today with regulation. You talked about insurance. Is there any other regulations that you feel that might be, the federal government might be holding back from that opportunity that we should provide as?
Well, we can certainly lower taxes.
Any others?
Well, our industry is obviously most heavily regulated by the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration. However, what we've seen in the course of the 30 years that we've been in business is that it is what I'll call mission creep, what seems like from just about every federal agency that has purview over what we do, whether that's OSHA, whether that's HHS. I mean, you can go down the list of them. I think that the regulatory burden in general it just seems to be one of gotcha from just about every agency that there is out there. I mean, the one that myself and our industry is feeling, the motor coach industry, as well as the other folks up here on the truck side, is just that weight right now that we have coming from FMCSA that doesn't really seem to be accomplishing much of any goal. So that's really kind of the number one. But it seems that mission creep from just about every other agency. I mean, we've actually been audited by TSA. I mean, it just seems like there's just this never-ending, envelope of federal regulations that just seems to be coming around us, and it just doesn't seem to be stopping. So I would say pretty much everything.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Kittensinger or Kritzensinger, whatever, Mr. Snotts, I'd also like to address this to you, and you kind of hit on it. As a business owner myself, those incidents that in the construction industry that we encountered, as you know, in the construction industry, you spend a lot of time on inner streets. You spend a lot of time within large communities like the Las Vegas area and other. We found that aggressive driver, in the majority of the cases, was usually the fault. And like you say, we end up getting hit with the insurance. We get hit with those regulations. And I've known throughout my career many individuals have been recognized for being million-mile or 2-million-mile drivers without any incidents, which is amazing to think that you could do that in the first place. Do you feel like that some of these restrictions are starting to maybe cost us those good drivers down the road, either one of you?
Absolutely. You mentioned aggressive drivers, and that's a good counterpoint, is that some truck drivers aren't safer just because they have technology. And it comes down to the driver. We can't use technology as a replacement for a good driver. But yes, drivers, and me as a driver, often felt like I was a target. If I stopped on the side of the road and I got hit, it was going to be my fault. If I turned down a road to try to pull into a stop and go to get a Coke, maybe that's a no-truck street. So every time we do this, we force the driver into every narrower lane where he or she can exist and do their jobs. And it's not the same as it was when I was growing up with my dad in the trucks back in the 70s, whenever many of those regulations didn't exist or weren't enforced at all. So whenever we do that, and I hear it from our drivers regularly, our veteran drivers especially, that whenever ELDs come in, they're just going to leave, or when this happens or when that happens.
I would just say that one thing we look at all the time and the industry does is driver shortage. I mean, it's a problem. Everyone in the industry listed as their number one problem. And there's a lot of factors that go into that. Some of it's regulation, some's congestion, some is it is a job that is not for everyone. So I don't think it's any one thing. I think it's more of a cumulative impact. Now, the old cowboy trucker of 10, 20 years ago, he'd get in his big hood truck, go down the road. He had no idea what he was doing. He'd be out a long time and come back. Now, with data, there's so much technology in the engine, in the ELDs, in the things we're doing, that they're really not alone anymore in that truck. It does give a good measure of control for safety, but it also takes away some of the independence that was the allure to these people for many years.
Thank you. Say I'm out of time.
Mr. Ribble.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, it's been a long afternoon for all of you. Thank you for being here. I know that there's some guests in the room that have photos of loved ones that have either been killed or injured in crashes, and I want you to know that we take those concerns and very seriously to try to figure out how in the world we can do a better job here so there's less of that there. And I appreciate you coming, and certainly my deepest condolences. I would like to maybe start with Major Reese. Do you believe, Major, that it would be safer, our roads, highways would be safer with fewer big trucks than more big trucks?
I don't really have any data one way or the other to say that. I will just say that CVSA's stance on size and weight on larger trucks has always been a safety one, and we don't want to see anything done on that until this study comes out, and we don't want to see an increase in size and weight until everything can be done safely.
Yeah, it just seems to me that obviously minutes of exposure, the amount of time a driver's on the road versus time that driver's not on the road, the driver not on the road is safer than the driver on the road. It just seems to me, would you agree, at least agree with that?
Oh, absolutely.
Mr. Kretzinger, would you agree with that?
Well, I would say you'd have no wrecks if nobody turned their engine on.
Got it.
But you would have no economy either.
Of course.
Yeah.
There's a line here that you draw at some
Yeah.
point, right? We heard earlier a discussion from Mr. Barletta about the idea of heavier trucks riding on city and town and rural roads and state roads as opposed to the interstate. Mr. Byrd, in your testimony, You mentioned an exemption that my state, Wisconsin, received that you opposed. They didn't really get an exemption. It was the current weights of trucks that were currently driving on a U.S. highway. When it becomes an interstate, we're grandfathered to an interstate highway. What would have happened had that grandfathering not happened is those trucks would often been redirected off the interstate where it's much safer to the county and city roads that you earlier testified in your testimony that you oppose. And so it almost seems like you're contradicting the very same thing, the very thing that you hope to get at would be to keep the heavier trucks on the interstate and off those roads. And I would encourage the Teamsters to reevaluate the position because you might actually end up working against your own best self-interest. Mr. Reese, if you could, just for a moment, I'm going to ask your permission, sir, to maybe take off your CVSA hat for a minute and talk to me a little bit about Idaho. You're from Idaho, state patrolman from Idaho, and they have experience with heavier multiple axle trucks and have had for several years. I understand that Idaho allows trucks to carry up to 129,000 pounds on multiple axles. Has this worked out well for the state, and do you have concerns about seeing other states moving in a similar direction?
Now, we ran a project for about 15 years, a pilot project in the southern part of our state. We did allow vehicles to go up to 129,000 pounds. At the end of that pilot, we deemed that project a success. I will emphasize that these vehicles had more axles. They were able to bridge the weight because damage to the roads was obviously a concern. And we're in the process right now of making that project go statewide, and we are moving it to the Panhandle, which has a much different road system. And as we do this, we are adding some additional safety requirements. We're in the process now to permit these loads. Some of the things we're looking at is a minimum number of years experience for drivers. So we don't want new drivers operating these bigger loads. They need to have the long combination vehicle training that is in the FMCSA's regulations. Safety-related things like that, because if we have these bigger loads on the road, we want them to be safe.
Yeah. Certainly, and hopefully if there were, if in fact those heavier trucks were there with more axles, more displaced weight that wasn't doing damage to infrastructure, stopping capabilities being the same, the reduction in the number of vehicles, which goes to my earlier question, the potential reduction in the number of vehicles and exposure on the road wouldn't necessarily go down because weight is distributed across fewer vehicles. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to ask unanimous consent to insert into the record a study released by the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration last year. The study found that a 6-axle, 97,000-pound truck stops just as quickly as a 5-axle truck loaded at 80,000 pounds. I think it's important information to have.
Without objection.
All right. Thank you very much. I realize that discussion about truck weights and safety, sometimes these things can get very, very complicated and often heated where they don't actually have to be. We're all trying to get to the same place. We wanted to get to the same place the right way. And so I want to thank you all for your testimony today. You guys did terrific, all of you. And so thank you for being here. And with that, I yield back.
Thank you. Mr. Micah?
Well, thank you. Sorry I came a little late. This is the day of dueling hearings. Somebody said Mr. Scott might have an answer for me, but in some previous hearings, I've mentioned that I've run into some people in the trucking industries that have told me that we're doing it all wrong, that, you know, the logs and the governors or whatever you've got on these vehicles, all that can be compromised or may not be as effective. But again, one of the individuals described to me that there is a device that you can have someone look into. It looks at the pupils, the eye, and can tell whether someone is fatigued. And he says that's the technology we need to be going to. Mr. Scott, are you aware of anything like that?
Well, thank you, Congressman Micah. I've heard of that. I don't have any personal
and I brought it up a couple times as we've discussed these things. Everybody says they've heard of it, but nobody's gotten to that technology. I pulled a couple of articles. There's some things that Caterpillar is using, and here's a Nissan driver detecting driving, but these are not that kind of thing. What I'm interested in is when we pull over a driver, you have them look into that. We have them blow into a device to find out if they're intoxicated. But I'm told the technology exists. Now, I want somebody to come back and let us know if this is real or not. Can you look into it? Let us know. Who else is in a position to check this out? Has anyone else heard of this?
Our association's heard of it, but there's no concrete information behind it, not enough experience to know if it has any value or does any good. Most things like that can be shown to have a good track record before they're really put into use. And the best thing is a driver that's experienced and motivated to do the right thing.
Mm-hmm. We don't have anybody from highway, do we, on this panel? Highway, Federal Highway? No? No. Well, again, the industry needs to help take a lead in finding technologies. And if this technology is out there, and it does seem like it is plausible that you could have a device like this, the biggest issue we still have with these big the big crashes is fatigue and driver drowsiness and some of those factors. Isn't that still one of our biggest causes of the accidents, guys? Everybody?
Actually,
Let the record reflect 3 out of 5 nodded their head yes. Good.
Actually, it's just driver behavior, whether it's the car or the truck, as was said earlier, and just a bad decision, maybe trying to take an exit at the last minute, following too closely, things like that. We see quite a bit. So it's just driver decision making, not necessarily fatigue being the top item.
Do you have I guess there is American Trucking, they're not here, but I was just wondering if there's an association. And you got labor here too who should be concerned. Yes, sir.
Yes, Congressman. I'm representing ATA, and a couple things I'd offer. One, I think they have some information on some of this technology that they'd be happy to provide. I'd also offer that one thing that is becoming more prevalent in the industry is event recorders.
Is what?
Event recorders. And event
event recorders, yes.
Yes,
okay.
And this is a camera that points out and also in towards the driver.
Well, the vehicles now today, I've been renting some cars lately. My God, I move slightly towards another vehicle. I mean, there's great alerts because my biggest hazard in driving is that blind spot. And when I don't have my wife next to me screaming, "You gotta hit him," but now you've got this. It's incredible, the devices, and we'll get there with vehicles. But I believe I would like y'all, somebody from American Trucking, go back and look at this. I'll see if I can find the individual. And they told me the military had used some of this to test the fatigue of troops and things, and it was fairly valid. But we need to be looking at those kind of technologies for safety enforcement. You don't want to burden the truckers with too much technology, but there are devices that can save lives and be cost effective. So we just need to stay ahead of that game because, again, maybe it's because I'm getting older, but I was just on one of the interstates with the double trailers in rain, and it was pretty hairy. And if they get drowsy or lose their place for a minute, we're all toast. So we've got to do a better job for safety for the future. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yield back.
Any other members? If I don't see any other members, I would like to follow up just a little bit with the direction I was headed earlier on questioning. This might be for Mr. Reese. As you know, in the West, particularly Utah, they've done some studies on their highways and other areas of where they've actually increased the speed limits, tested up to 80 miles an hour. And it's, I believe their results were positive, that they actually have had less traffic incidents. With some of the restrictions to holding trucks to 65, would it be better that maybe that be held within the state's purview of how those trucks move? Because it's back to that aggressive driver, that slower truck moving on a higher freeway. Any comments on that from your side, Captain?
Well, that kind of goes down the line of speed limiters, and right now we're waiting to see what FMCSA's what they come out with on speed limiters. But the states do have varied speed limits. We just raised on our some of our interstates in Idaho last year. We raised 80 miles an hour for cars and 70 for trucks. So we still have some variance there. But you've also got just the variances in geography and stuff from state to state and area to area as well, and that affects truck operations as well. Areas like Idaho where we have a lot of hills, the trucks slow down anyway on the hills.
Thank you. If there's any further question from members of the subcommittee, seeing none, I'd like to thank each witness for their testimony today, and your contribution to today's discussion has been very informative and helpful. I'd like to ask unanimous consent that the record of today's hearing remain open until such time our witnesses have provided answers to any questions that may be submitted to them in writing, and a unanimous consent that the record remain open for 15 days for additional comments and information submitted by members or witnesses to be included in the record of today's hearing. Without objection, so ordered. If there's no further members having any other to add, the subcommittee stands adjourned.